Studies at the Department of Education in Nigeria. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the first of its kind. Distinguished guests and colleagues across the world, you're welcome to this great occasion. And quickly, the program is starting in earnest as we go straight to taking the national anthem. This is Nigeria where we give respect to our nation. And before we do anything, we start with the national anthem. That's how we show our loyalty to the country. So much. We're going to that's what Thank you very much. Distinguished colleagues around the world, this is a very important job. We start every program with prayer. So, I think we're going to take your own prayer, which is to be taken by our own self. Shall we pray? Father, in the name of Jesus, we bless your name for the privilege we have to gather this most international conference of the Directorate of Gender and Sustainable Development Studies of this college. We thank you for this great opportunity and we appreciate you for the great opportunity. We lift the high, Lord, in the name of Jesus Christ. Whatever we are doing, we have, they are committed into your hands. Lord, we will take absolute control. Lives of generations yet to come will be touched even from here. Today, our deliberation shall actually go off. And every day of this program, we will declare in the house that your presence shall be felt. We appreciate you. All praise and honor to you. We pray for Nigeria to keep Nigeria one and make Nigeria peaceful. And we pray with thanksgiving. In Jesus' mighty name. Thank you. Thank you. Can we put our hands together? And that is the introduction of dignitaries and people who are here present. Quickly, I am going to introduce the college management, the provost of this great institution. My provost is already associated with another international appointment, so we are signing somewhere. And I'm talking about our own dear provost, Dr. Samuel Akintoye. I want to quickly move on to the man who is standing in for him here. He is the deputy provost, our own dear deputy provost. I am talking about no other person than Dr. Ajibade Ifuifu. Distinguished guests and colleagues, I think I should move on to introducing other members of the college management who are probably not available here physically, but will be joining us from their various departments and offices. First, let me move on to the registrar of the college, Mrs. O. Pakurede. Mrs. Pakurede, you're welcome to this Zoom meeting. Thank you very much. I think I should move on to the librarian, Mr. Akorede. He is also not here present physically, but he's going to join us on Zoom from his office. I think I should go on straight to introduce the man in charge of money and finance and the institution, and that is the boss of Mr. Gio Abdul, the boss of ADM College of Education. You're welcome, sir. I think I should also go on to introduce other deans, but I'm not going to mention the names of other deans. We have deans of the School of Languages, dean of the School of Education, General Education, adult and non-formal education. We have so many of them. There are 7 schools in this institution. The dean of the School of Art and Social Sciences is also there. We have the dean of the School of Science. We have the dean of the School of Book and Head. We have the dean of the School of Languages and various other directors who are representing various directorates in the institution. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, you're welcome. Thank you so very much. Our Excellency is already coming. Our Excellency is already coming in to join the program. The wife of our own Amiable is already in here. The wife of our own Amiable governor of the state, Our Excellency, Mrs. Betty Anyanwu Akeredolu. That's our mommy. That's our mommy. Mama, we appreciate you. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce members of the local organizing committee. And we have the first person in that directorate, which I think should come forth before I introduce the chairman of the LOC. I'm talking about the director of the Directorate of Gender and Sustainable Development Studies at the College of Education, Dr. MC Onleku. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. You're so much appreciated. Quickly, I move on to the chairman of the local organizing committee, who also is the deputy director of that directorate, Dr. Bridget Adeyeju. You're welcome. Thank you very much. We have in the house the secretary to the local organizing committee, who is also a PhD holder. We have Dr. Abibuli. He's also in charge of the College Center for Educational Technology. You're welcome, sir. Thank you so very much. We have in the house the man who is also the acting director of the Management Information System of the college, and who also doubles as the director of protocols and the communication and the public relations for this program at the local organizing level. I am talking about Dr. Henry Adeyeju. You're welcome, sir. Thank you so very much. Other persons not yet recognized, one person sincerely, we appreciate you. Other people working in this program to be actually what it is today. I think we want to quickly say thank you so very much. I'm talking about the team of engineers that are working with the director of MIS. Thank you so very much. Every one of you are highly appreciated. My humble self, I am by I am the acting director of the Directorate of International Linkages, Responsible Research and Development for the college. Quickly, let me invite the host director. I am talking about Dr. MC Onleku.
Good morning, everyone. A welcome address delivered by Dr. Martina Chineke, Directorate of Gender and Sustainable Development Studies, DGSDS, at the College of Education, on the occasion of the Directorate's maiden biennial international conference, on Wednesday, 5th May 2021. The Provost, Dr. Esther, all principal officers of the college, the Provost being represented here by the Deputy, Dr. Nkeji. So welcome. All principal officers of the college, the special guest of honor of today, Her Excellency, Chief Betty Anyama Adebayo, the First Lady of Ondo State. The keynote speaker, the keynote presenter, Professor Bridget Stebo. The lead paper presenter, Dr. Nicholas also. These are the records. All the GLDS board members, heads of departments, distinguished colleagues, distinguished participants, all invited girls, the Student Union Executive, great Nigerian students, great Africans, ladies and gentlemen of the press, ladies and gentlemen, it is with a deep sense of appreciation and gratitude that I welcome you all to the opening ceremony of the Maiden Biennial International Conference of the Directorate of Gender and Sustainable Development Studies at the Yemi College of Education of Nigeria. Today, being Wednesday, 5th of May, 2021, with the theme, Gender Equality and Sustainable Development in Africa under COVID-19 era. Today has been set aside for us to rub minds together, brainstorm and iron out the way forward towards the realization of the United Nations specified World Sustainable Development Goals with inclusive gender parity in all ramifications of Africa's developmental goals, bearing in mind the related and diverse effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. Indeed, we feel highly delighted and honored to have you all present here today to witness this very special occasion. I sincerely welcome Her Excellency, the First Lady of Ondo State, Chief Betty Anyama Adebayo, who is the guest speaker of the guest of honor for today's conference. The Ondo State Digital Mama, the Breaker Mama, Ada Emma Ada too. I thank you so much for finding time out of your tight schedule to grace this conference. I welcome the keynote presenter, Professor Bridget Stebo, a seasoned academic, a gender advocate, a Canadian scholar of the college, and a friend to the directorate from University of Massachusetts, Dartmouth, USA. I also sincerely welcome the lead paper presenter, Dr. Nicholas also, an erudite scholar, an internationally bred administrator, a genius, and an academic guru, recognized and honored by the World Health Organization. The current Executive Director, African Technology Policy Studies Network, ATPS, Nairobi, Kenya. On behalf of the staff and the board members of the directorate, I appreciate the chief host of this conference, Dr. Samuel Adibiola Akintunde, the provost at the Yemi College of Education, for his fatherly contributions and financial support towards the closing of this conference. I salute the efforts of all the local organizing committee members, Dr. Kainde Adeniyi, Dr. B. Adeyoju, their team and all board members of the directorate, for the effective and efficient organization of the conference, their sacrifices, and cooperation which gave way to the success of this conference. To say that the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a step, today's conference is the first of its kind organized by the directorate. The reason for deeming the August occasion a memorable one in the history of the directorate. Today's event gives us the opportunity to actively join other researchers all over the globe to contribute to the ongoing discussions on the COVID-19 response and recovery as we struggle for the emancipation, empowerment of women, and combating societal inequalities and inequities for global sustainable development continues. The conference theme, Gender Equality and Sustainable Development in Africa under COVID-19 era. It's in line with the United Nations theme for this year's 2021 International Women's Day celebration titled Achieving an Equal Future in COVID-19 World. The theme is also aligned with the priority theme of the 5th session of the United Nations Women Commission on Status of Women. It's a topical and timely conference, which is main objective are to research further into the realization of gender equality, social inclusion, and policy mainstreaming in the COVID-19 era. The theme is synonymously interpreted as asking the question, how can we achieve equal future and sustainable development in Africa in the current COVID-19 and meet the power and setback economic, political, social, and cultural ramifications of life in the African country? Meaning, how can we in the present new normal ensure that there is women's flow and the effective participation in all spheres of life, of coronavirus? How can we tackle unemployment, poverty, eliminate gender-based violence and social crime, which have been a condition of the pandemic? How can we ensure that women's human rights are not further? How can we ensure a better life for all Africans, especially those internationally visited sectors due to war, boundary disputes, natural disasters, and terrorism, as cases are on? How can the economy of the African nations be revamped for sustainable development in the world? As we enter to the goal phase, and their progress towards gender parity, more dimensions, economic participation and opportunity, educational attainment, health and survival, and political empowerment, report that global parity rate stands at 58%. And gender parity is almost a century away, 100 years to gender gap. That there is global improvement in the quest for gender balance in the globe. That global educational attainment and health survival have reached nearly parity at 96.1% and 95.7%. While the economic participation and opportunity, the gender gap widens slightly. That instead of 202 years initially estimated, closing of gender gap in this area may reach 257 years more. The report asserts that none of us will see gender parity in our lifetime, and more likely will many of our children, because gender parity will not be attained for 99.5 years to come. From the book data, it's obvious that the theme of the conference controls the enable researchers, technocrats, scholars, and other stakeholders to explore all possibilities to resolve the effects of the pandemic that almost grounded all aspects of development and caused a great progression in the gender gap, most facets of life, the culture, and generally all of our community. Ladies and gentlemen, I can assure you that you will have a interesting moment and an energetic academic experience. Later in your memory for a better understanding and knowledge. I assure you that I am highly delighted by your distinguished presence here today. Once again, I welcome you all to this maiden international conference of the directors. Thank you so much for coming.
For those of us who want to clap, please do so very well. The Global Director of Sustainable and Development very wonderful speeches. Welcome all to this great occasion. Distinguished governors and gentlemen, It's time for me to bring up my own group, ably represented by the deputy governor, as he presents the hosting address and the formal hosting of the conference. After the host, Dr. Ajibade, the quick, so, welcome.
Stage the more actually
of our money, the mama of the state, Mama Chief, Her Excellency Betty Anyanwu Akeredolu. Please come, Director, please come and take the floor.
Of Chief Betty Anyanwu. Good morning once more. As I read the profile of the Chief Betty Anyanwu Akeredolu, Her Excellency Betty Anyanwu Akeredolu, the First Lady of Ondo State. Betty Anyanwu Akeredolu was born on July 20, 1953, to the family of Chief D.U.B. late and Nneoma Dora Anyanwu late in Emadra, Owerri West Local Government Area of Imo State. Music and internet so that we can continue. Music. So sorry for that interruption. So I want to read the profile of Her Excellency Betty Anyanwu Akeredolu, the First Lady of Ondo State. Betty Anyanwu Akeredolu was born on July 20, 1953, to the family of Chief D.U.B., late Chief D.U.B., and late Nneoma Dora Anyanwu in Emadra, Owerri West Local Government Area of Imo State. She graduated from the University of Nigeria, Nsukka, UNN, with a BSc in zoology. She obtained her MSc Fisheries, major in agriculture, from the University of Philippines, Ilolo. She's a firm believer in continuing education, which made her to go back to the University of Ibadan in 2016 for her Masters in Public Health, MPH in Health Promotion and Education, graduation in view. She's the founder of Breast Cancer Association of Nigeria, BRCA, a leading NGO that is galvanizing action against breast cancer in Nigeria through public education, patient support, advocacy, and research. BRCA was founded in 1997 after her experience with breast cancer. She saw the need to do something that would bring about a positive, lasting change in the Nigerian society that was deeply entrenched in the misconceptions of what causes breast cancer and how it can be treated. She has won several awards both locally and internationally for her work and commitment to the fight against breast cancer in Nigeria. With her unprecedented humanitarian disposition and concern for family and societal development, Betty Anyam Akeredolu has given herself in service to others through her foundation, Betty Anyam Akeredolu Foundation, BAC, so as to touch more lives. She displayed passion in advancing and promoting literacy in children through programs such as Reading is Fun, Easy Competitions, and Spelling Bee competitions. She's also committed to advancing the economic status of women, nurturing the interests of young girls in ICT and solar energy technology in order to bridge the gender gap in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Developing talents in arts and sports, promotion of improved sensitization of schools and communities, and inclusive qualitative education for the deaf. Furthermore, she has single-handedly championed great participation of women in politics at all levels, as well as promote gender equity in governance. In 2017, she launched a 200 million naira crowdfunding project to provide financial aid to indigent breast cancer patients in Nigeria. Betty Anyam Akeredolu is a commercial fish farmer who also provides consultancy services under the business name Aquatech Farms Ventures. She nurtured her career as a fisheries expert while working with the Federal Department of Fisheries and retired voluntarily after 28 years of diligent service. In addition, she has made a foray into politics since 2007 and is very active in the present dispensation. Betty is married to Oluwarotimi Akeredolu, son, the current executive governor of Ondo State, and blessed with 4 wonderful children and 4 grandchildren. She's widely traveled, and her hobbies include reading, gardening, sewing, music, jogging, tennis, and yoga. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for giving me this singular honor to be the one to present the profile of Her Excellency Betty Anyam Akeredolu. Thank you.
Thank you very much, the Director for Directorate of Gender and Sustainable Development. Thank you so very much for that wonderful presentation on the Mama Wisdom. Thank you so very much. Ladies and gentlemen, time for Mama in the States, Her Excellency Chief Betty Anyam Akeredolu to present her remarks.
Yes, ma'am. You have to unmute her. You have to unmute her. You know, start to unmute her. She can't unmute herself. You have to unmute her so she can talk. She can't unmute herself. Yes. So tell the person how to assistant to unmute her.
Okay, I guess it's all right. Thank you. I've been struggling to unmute myself because The message I got was that the host will be the one to unmute me. Thank you so very much. Please confirm that you can hear my voice. Hello, everyone. You can hear my voice. Okay, thank you.
We can hear your voice.
Okay, thank you so very much. I would like to congratulate the directorate headed by Dr. Martina Onwebu for putting together this Zoom meeting. I also like to express my appreciation to the institution as a whole, the Adeyemi College of Education, for thinking it fit to bring us together for this Zoom meeting, which has become our way of life, our new normal. For some time, I couldn't hear a thing due to poor internet connection. But anyway, I'm happy that you can hear my voice. Probably I will have to touch on this problem later on in my discussion. Well, I was asked to give a remark on this very important topic, gender equality and sustainable development in Africa under COVID-19 era. Well, COVID-19 is the new word all over the world, and here in Nigeria, we have coined it in a way that every man or woman on the street can recognize, and that is Koro. When I say Koro, you know what I meant. And this very illness, which is a respiratory infection, has really touched the entire world in a very profound manner. And WHO had stated or given us the data that about 3.9 million in the world had been, but you all know that the pandemic is just beyond health issue or health crisis. And we have, or the world or countries had responded to the crisis in one way or the other. But we have also noticed that COVID-19 is gender sensitive and has become an arrested development to humanity, impacting the women folk in a terrible manner. And women and girls, they have really suffered under this pandemic. While the statistics has shown that more men had died due to COVID, but a lot of women, had been affected in a very profound way. If you didn't die as a woman, you might have been forced into socio-economic disaster. And I believe this is an area that women are going to discuss or talk about to see how we can come out of the problem. You agree with me that before the COVID era, about 58% of women within the continent of Africa were self-employed, doing their little businesses here and there, frying akara or roasting corn or doing one thing or the other. And it means that they are daily wage earners. And here you have a situation where you can go out. You can imagine the magnitude of problems such women will face at home, no food to eat, and all the rest of them. So it means that the livelihood of so many women have been halted or arrested. And that is a serious matter. And apart from that, because women, they don't have anywhere to go any longer, there is a heightened cases of abuse in the homes. Young girls who should be at school, they are now stuck at home. And you have the roving eyes of men on them, and that could result into sexual abuse and violence. It's also this kind of situation where you have nowhere to go could be tempting. So you have easy reach to young girls at home, and that could lead to pregnancy. Now, I want to talk about how we've been able to manage this situation in Ondo State. Like I said, different countries, different governments, excuse me, they have devised means or strategies to deal with this situation. In Ondo State, as the First Lady of Ondo State, my office, with the support of the government anyway, came up with ways and manners to cushion the impact of COVID-19 on families. We were able to come up with projects such as, let me start with the one that will affect people at home first, food. We talk about that most of these women, the earners, wage earners, they can't go out to get food or fend for their families. So food was an issue, and very important for that matter. And we look, while the government was able to reach out to the entire populace, we recognize that the widows somehow were not really getting what they expected to get. And you know, widows in our environment, they belong to the most marginalized, or the marginalized of the marginalized, let me put it that way. And we thought that we need to reach out to these women, and we came out with the Widows Care. And we had to solve that problem by ensuring that every widow in Ondo State registered, and digitally. You know, virtual communication conferences like what we're doing today, Zoom, is our new normal, is our way of life. So we have to make everybody key in, because without it, we won't be able to reach quite a number of women. So nearly all widows were able to register on our website. And today we have on record about 25,000 widows, which we never, in our faintest imagination, that we had so many widows in Ondo State. So the pandemic made us realize that there are so many widows in Ondo State, as many as that. Therefore, our widows are no longer invisible. They are now visible. We know them, we know where they are. And we use that data to share the palliative to these women. Another thing we also ventured into, which had turned out to be very, very successful, was the issue of tackling the gender-based violence cases getting to us. We're able to establish emergency response center, so that if you're molested or there's danger around you, you have this number to call, and it's toll-free. And through that response center, we've been able to, deal with situations where women and girls had been found to be in a harm's way. When the lockdown eased up, we also thought of extending awareness to the girls, especially those in secondary school, and we came up with the yellow card. The yellow card is a preventive measure that any girl being molested in school or elsewhere, you present that, you flash the yellow card, which is the same card you use during football. When there is somebody is at fault or a referee finds you at fault, they give you that. I think it is red card in the football field, but we are using yellow card as a sign of warning. And what he had done now is that our girls are now aware. They now know what sexual advances are or what they are meant. And is also an indication that the government cares for our girls. So every girl in Ondo State knows that anybody that tries to mess up with her will be in trouble. So having said that, we are delighted that gender issues are concerned, and we keep on promoting or supporting or advocating for policies that will advance the care of women, raising the consciousness that women and girls matter within our society. We will not relent. We'll keep pushing for government to do their bit, just like I've just mentioned that virtual meetings, conferences, they are now our way of life. Government has to sit up to make sure that poor
Oh, all right. We are indeed sorry.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so okay, maybe it was during the presidency.
Continente África, Norteamérica, Canadá, Europe. Welcoming by James foreign friends UK. She coincided with Tony Fowler, Hour of Gender, the Gender of Power, Women's Labor, Rights and Responsibility in Africa 2013. Select articles include What Are It and Where It Matters 2018. And then a history of culture, both and lesbian in Cameroon, Africa 2017. democratizing education, the politics of schooling and social justice in Africa, a Tiwala tribute for Nelson Mandela 2014, introducing African communities in the United States 2010, gender and jobs in the making of a colonial economy 2013, gender and globalization in Africa 2012, and motherhood, women's body, and eating well, pregnancy, a better form of life in Cameroon, Ghana 2012. She's presently completing a historical calendar entry, the life and times of Madam Matali, based on an extraordinary African woman, a political and religious icon and veteran health worker. Professor Bridget Tibor, on April 2, 2021, received the University of Texas at Austin the Wangari Maathai Award for Innovative Scholarship and Leadership. The Wangari Maathai Award for Innovative Scholarship and Leadership recognizes the stellar and emerging work of a scholar whose contribution to enhancing the future of Africa is expected to have an enduring transformational impact. The recipient of this award is expected to ultimately embody and honor equality and stature the work of Wangari Maathai, who was a scientist, scholar, feminist, environmentalist, and conservationist, political and human rights activist, politician, distinguished academic chair, goodwill ambassador, recipient of 15 honorary doctorates, Nobel Peace Laureate, academic and public intellectual, philanthropic, messenger of peace, founder of the Green Belt Movement in Africa was recognized and represented. Dear participants, are delighted to hand over the floor of this virtual conference to an international scholar of great repute, no other person than Professor Bridget Tibor. Professor Tibor is live and direct from United States now. Our thank you. Thank you,
That's a great one. That's a great one. I think for those of us who are physically present, can we put our hands together for Dr. Director of MIS? That's what we call Management Information System of Academic College of Education. We are moving on now to listen to the presentation of Professor Bridget Tibor, Professor of History and Black Studies from Massachusetts University, Dartmouth, United States of America. So you have the floor.
Okay, is it my turn now? Hello, everyone. I'm trying to not share my screen. Okay.
On, Prof. You are live now.
Oh, okay. Good morning, everyone. It is my singular pleasure to be here, and all protocol respected, but I want to give a particular shout out to the Provost Akin Tunde Samuel and the executive team of Adeyemi I see Dr. Adenegan, I greet you. Everyone at Adeyemi, I feel particularly honored and blessed to be here with you. What, excuse me, the circumstances of coming to join you today are quite special and dear to my heart. Dr. Mrs. Martina Onwuegbu, thank you most especially because I want to join everyone else to congratulate you for putting together this wonderful event. I really am privileged, for this is like my baby. The birthing process, which started in 2017 when I first arrived at Adeyemi College of Education. As a Carnegie Scholar, we worked together to make this Directorate of Gender and Sustainable Development Studies a reality. Now, today we are here celebrating the biennial, the first biennial maiden conference of that directorate. And so congratulations to you, and congratulations to Team Adeyemi College of Education. My only regret is that I cannot be there physically with you today, but I'm honored to be part of what is happening today. I'm also quite honored to be delivering a keynote address of sorts on the importance of gender balance and sustainable development goals in Africa under the shadow of a devastating pandemic known as COVID-19. Obviously, this topic is important, and it even seems quite challenging and overwhelming, given the weight of the three component parts that can easily stand alone. We have the very weighty gender balance or gender equality. We have sustainable development goals that are the guiding principles of what we're supposed to do to have a productive and successful environment that is inclusive to everyone. And then we have COVID-19. However, this morning, I want to just break it down a little bit, one at a time, as I speak about Africa and her status within each of those component parts. My hope is therefore to show how and why gender balance and the implementation of core sustainable development goals can help the African continent in combating COVID-19 and minimizing its impact. And by doing so, move African countries beyond that pandemic into a new era of post-COVID-19 reopening and rebuilding, armed with appropriate and relevant knowledge skills. And so the title of my talk today is From History to Advocacy: The Realization of Gender Balance and Sustainable Development Goals in Africa During the Pandemic. Now, African development policies since independence from the 1960s have left much to be desired or have failed due to bad governance, mismanagement of resources, failure to provide basic needs of Africans and African nations. The issue is compounded by a lack of gender balance and gender equity by African governments and attendant institutions. This presentation, therefore, will critically examine and highlight the intricate and contested processes of development in Africa and its significance for African societies, African women especially, and the African diaspora. It will add to the discourse on gender balance and sustainable development by not only illuminating social injustice, but also highlighting the gendered patterns of development that have left many women struggling for survival in the informal sector of the economy and elsewhere, thus creating serious problems for real development. Finally, I will examine the politics and economics of development that marginalize, exclude, and disempower and denude certain groups of people in society, especially women, while giving privilege, authority, and power to others. I conclude that the rise of women's work and advocacy, their movements and resistance, is part of a survival strategy, and that addressing and explaining their major grievances and challenges can lead to a much needed gender balance and sustainable development in Africa. The paper therefore uses an interdisciplinary methodology that combines primary and secondary sources, that is, archival material, official documents, studies by researchers, activists, NGOs, and ordinary people's experiences to examine the trajectory of women's roles in society, their movements thus far, and the new generation of Africans who refuse to be recolonized or marginalized. Lastly, it explores the different purposes to which identity politics, nationalism, gender segregation have been put into wider struggles for nationhood, social justice, human rights, anti-colonial resistance movements, and suggests ways forward for Africa's growth and progress in spite of the devastating COVID-19. Let me tell you a little bit about my move towards advocacy from history. As a trained historian, over the years, even starting in graduate school, I worried about the lack of female representation in academia and in most history books. I also worried about the lack of female voices and representation in high places and positions of power and political institutions. Now, coming from my own background as an African born in the Cameroons, West Africa, specifically from the former British Southern Cameroons, AKA Ambazonia, I had the privilege of being grounded in my African cultural heritage. Cameroon is a small country of 25 million people, comparable in size to the state of California in the United States, yet it is such a diverse country with over 200 ethnic groups speaking 265 languages. My village in Cameroon is known as Batibo, and that is in Mogamo land. It is a place where there is respect for humanity, where visitors are welcomed with open arms and protected, and where there is a strong and vibrant community. It is not surprising because that is the culture of most Bantu-speaking people. That background grounded me once I started venturing out of Cameroonian boundaries or borders. And when you know what it's like to feel left out, you work to ensure that others are included. And so in terms of my work, which centers on African history and culture, centers on women and gender studies, centers on diasporic and Black studies, and oral history or oral traditions used as a tool to uncover women's hidden histories. It became imperative for me to find a way to make sure that in my work, I explore the intersections of gender, race, power, and politics in the making of modern Africa. African history, therefore, by women and about women has been pivotal in questioning gender subordination, traditional female roles, and advocating for the empowerment of women in the political, socio-cultural, economic, and other fields. I therefore focus on this emerging trend in West Central African history, which portrays women as active agents and increasingly as protagonists of their own lives. My work therefore joins different analytical perspectives from different fields in an effort to understand and interrogate the place of female agency and women's empowerment in Africa. As a feminist and an Africanist, I therefore strive to engage, investigate, explain the complex terrain of untapped multi-sensorial sources on Africa in order to produce the most coherent account on women's work, women's role, and African history. Therefore, my scholarship is not simply about the production of history, but also about the restoring subjects of history. Focusing on women's historical agency in Africa and their modalities of empowerment is key to restoring them as subjects of history. This is no small task when we take into account that African women have been the most silent, the most exoticized, and objectified products of predominantly androcentric and Eurocentric history. As a result, my work uncovers the linkages between European colonialism and indigenous women's loss of power, interrogating how did the locus of power shift, through what specific mechanisms did that happen, and how were gender boundaries redefined through colonial political structures. These questions, therefore, can only be answered through the triangulation of written and oral sources, from oral traditions to life histories, in order to bridge the lines of change and continuity between colonial and post-colonial eras. Now, what happened during the colonial period was an erasure of part of women's history or most of women's agency. Let me take you a little bit back in time to a place that I call the glory and majesty of African women. That place explores the intersections of race, gender, politics, and power. It celebrates, and rightfully so, African women, for they have come a long way and have accomplished a lot. Some of what they have accomplished is common knowledge. For example, the anti-colonial protests of the 20th century. For instance, the 1929 Nigerian Igbo Women's War, the 1958 Anlo Women's Protest of Cameroon, to name this few. Other accomplishments that are more hidden, I use the term hidden because unless one has historical knowledge or awareness of one's community or country, it is difficult to know some of these great dates and accomplishments. So I'm going to ask you some of the questions that I ask my students in African history classes that I teach at the University of Massachusetts in Dartmouth. What do you know about Africa or African women? And how do you know it? The what is the content and context. The how is the historiography, or how knowledge about Africa and African women has been studied, collected, shaped, and disseminated by historians and other scholars. A closer examination of this process tells us that there has been a clear bias against Africa and African women, thanks to early events and experiences such as the slave trade, colonization, neo-colonialism, or the Cold War, and today, globalization, which is a fancy term for colonization, as well as colonial writings and colonial processes and practice. Not to bore you with details, the outcome of these experiences have been a systematic exploitation and marginalization of an entire continent and its people. As if that were not enough, women in Africa have had to struggle for survival, for their voices to be heard, for gender equity and basic human rights, even more so than their male counterparts. Recently, the United Nations has been pushing people to understand that women's rights are human rights. The resilience, therefore, of African women in the face of adversity is legendary. This is no surprise, given that we come from a long line responsible for powerful women, including queens, warriors, phenomenal leaders, and mothers. During the pre-colonial period, we had Queen Nefertari or Nefertiti from Kemetic civilization. We have Makere Hatshepsut. We have Queen Tiye. We have Queen Isnofret, mother of Prince Ramses. During the 19th century, to name just those few. During the 19th century, we had female freedom fighters and leaders. We have Queen Sheba, we have Dalia Al-Kahina, we have Queen Zinga, we have Queen Amina of Zazu, we have Ya Atantawa. These women therefore represent the shoulders upon which we stand. They serve as the guiding light for the younger generation, whether they are feminists of the first wave or second wave or third wave, that Africa is a powerhouse, that African women are the force behind the survival of African nations, and that warriors and freedom fighters existed even as colonization and colonial processes tried to dismantle some of those accomplishments. Today we have other strong women who have made their mark in the world. We have the Wangari Maathais, we have the Ngozi Iweala, and many others who continue to show that African women are strong, capable, and intelligent women. And so for gender inequality to continue to loom large over the heads of Africans and African women is something that needs to be addressed. It's like a cankerworm eating at the soul of Africans. And it's about time that those biases are eliminated. Across board, African women are still marginalized. African women still bear the brunt of childcare. African women still do everything to take care of their families. African women, like Usman Semben said, hold the African sky. Why is it therefore difficult for the powers that be or African governments to implement some of the protocols that the United Nations has so generously put forth to guarantee equality, social justice, and freedoms for all? You have the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination. That is one good case to fall upon. And so within the educational field, you have in both secondary and tertiary institutions, women lagging behind in terms of science and technology, women lagging behind in terms of access to education, partly due to some of the cultural attributes and religious beliefs and traditions in various countries. This conference therefore gives us the opportunity to explore some of these issues and push for gender equality, social justice, and human rights for everyone, including women. I will therefore be remiss if I don't take a few minutes to talk about some of the key concepts and terminologies as used not only in the theme for the conference, but also in my paper. And so I start with gender balance, also known as sexual equality or equality of sexes. And so this is a state of equal ease of access to resources and opportunities, regardless of gender, including economic participation and decision-making. And the same state of valuing different behaviors, aspirations, and needs equally, regardless of gender. And so gender equality is the goal, while gender neutrality and gender equity are practices and ways of thinking that help in achieving the goal. Gender parity, which is used to measure gender balance in a given situation, therefore, can aid in achieving gender equality, but it is not the goal in itself. Gender equality is more than equal representation. It is strongly tied to women's rights and often requires policy changes, and that is where we come in, or that is where you come in. How to effect change, how to negotiate and lobby transformative changes that can impact the masses and especially transform women's lives. According to UNICEF, therefore, gender equality means that women and men and girls and boys enjoy the same rights, enjoy the same resources, the same opportunities, and the same protections. It does not require that girls and boys or women and men be the same or that they be treated exactly alike. It just means that they have equal access and equal opportunities to resources, and that women as well as men be protected and enjoy the same rights. Globally, therefore, achieving equality also requires the elimination of harmful practices against women, girls, including sexual violence, wartime rape, trafficking, femicide or the killing of female babies, gender wage gap, and other forms of oppression. It is common knowledge that the glass ceiling exists for women. Connected to that concept of gender equality is the term intersectionality that I prefer to use in my work, which is an analytical framework of understanding how aspects of a person's social and political identity combine or come together to create different modes of discrimination and privilege. Globally, about 750 million illiterate adults exist in the world. 2/3 of that number are estimated to be women. The causes for this are found among gender equality, misogynistic violence, as well as marriage and pregnancy, often associated with poverty and geographic isolation or lack of access to education or deliberate blockage of education, which is what we see in most parts of Africa, where religion seems to be used as a tool to block females from attaining education. Despite many international agreements affirming their human rights, women are still much more likely than men to remain poor and illiterate. They have less access to ownership of land or property, credit, or training and employment. And this stems from those archaic stereotypes of women being labeled as only childbearers and homemakers rather than breadwinners, especially because overall, most women do work that is non-paid. If women were to be paid for all the work that they do, then they won't have the problem that most of them are facing, or the problem that has pushed most women, especially in Africa, to be performing or working in the informal economic sector. As of 2017, gender equality is the 5th of the 17 Sustainable Goals, SDG, of the United Nations. And so that is the second component of the theme that we have, Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. And gender inequality is measured annually by the United Nations Development Program's Human Development Reports. Those Sustainable Development Goals are a set of 17 interlinked global goals designed to be the blueprint to achieve a better and more sustainable future for everyone. Those Sustainable Development Goals also apply to African nations. They are intended to be achieved by the year 2030. And they are included in a UN resolution called the 2030 Agenda, or what is colloquially known as Agenda 2030. These SDGs were developed in the post-2015 development agenda as the future global development framework to succeed the Millennium Development Goals, which ended in 2015. Very quickly, and I won't go into the details, the 17 Sustainable Development Goals include no poverty, zero hunger, good health and well-being, quality education, gender equality, clean water and sanitation, affordable and clean energy, decent work and economic growth, industry, innovation and infrastructure, reducing inequality, sustainable cities and communities, responsible consumption and production, climate action, life below water, life on land, peace, justice, and strong institutions, partnerships for the goals. Though these goals are broad and interdependent, 2 years later, that is July 2017, the SDGs were made more actionable by the UN resolution adopted by the General Assembly. And so with all these goals, we can highlight the core ones that continue to be a problem. We have quality education, core development goal number 4. We have gender equality number 5. We have clean water and sanitation number 6. We have affordable and clean energy number 7. You have decent work and economic growth number 8, to name just this few. And so all of this, therefore, cross-cut multiple issues like gender equity, education, culture, economy, peace and justice, and so on. And all these things, therefore, represent areas that women are struggling with, areas that gender bias has crippled women's efforts, and that needs to change. Africa's history is long and rich, but these problems persist and continue to create problems. It is the birthplace of humankind. It is the birthplace of other great historical figures, male figures, in addition to the female that I had mentioned. You have Imhotep, you have Mansa Musa, you have King Afonso, Nnamdi Azikiwe, Julius Nyerere, Kwame Nkrumah, Charlotte Maseki, and Nelson Mandela. All these people are proof that Africa can do better. But Africa continues to struggle and suffer. In addition to its complexity, Africa is home to numerous raw materials and minerals. You have cocoa, you have coffee, rubber, palm oil, timber, diamond, gold, and uranium. Recently, there is coltan. Is anyone familiar with coltan? 8% of the world's coltan, a mineral essential for software industry, is found in the Congo. Cell phones, laptops, PlayStations, all need coltan to work. Yet, that only goes to highlight, in addition to Africa's oil, the curse of diamonds and natural resources. For a continent that has all these resources, Africa has failed to pull its weight, to use those resources for the development and growth of not only its people and countries, but create a basis for the survival of future generations. Today, Africa continues to suffer from sporadic civil wars, military coups d'etats, and so on and so forth. People continue to be restless because of the conditions in various countries. We see Africans crossing the desert, desperate to run away from home because home has become too hot. Home, for many, seem to have no future. And so those who can brave it try to cross the desert. Most of them perish along the way. Others try to cross the Atlantic or cross the Amazon forest to get to the United States. And so we have a long list of those destructive wars and genocide. We have Rwanda, Liberia, Sierra Leone, Sudan. And then we have radicalism in the form of Boko Haram, the Lord's Resistance Army, or Joseph Kony's movement. Additionally, we have secessionist movements brewing in the continent. In addition to Biafrans struggling to secede, you have in the Cameroons, a nation that had always been peaceful, is now engulfed in what is called the Anglophone crisis, or the war of the restoration of independence for Southern Cameroons. A peaceful protest started by lawyers and teachers to improve working conditions quickly turned violent. And since 2016 till today, it has been a hot zone, partly because when people protest in Africa, African governments and African leaders, instead of listening to the people and dialoguing and finding a solution, they decide to use military might and military force to silence people. And so since 2017, when the president of Cameroon, Paul Biya, declared war on Southern Cameroonians, that part of the country has been in turmoil. And with that turmoil came victims of war, refugees, mostly women, running away. Some have crossed the borders into Nigeria. Others have since died because of the recklessness of African leadership that does not speak and listen to its people. And so that is part of the problem that we're having with African leadership. Not only are they perceived as not representing the people, to compound that, they use the military and the police forces that are supposed to protect the people to crush the people. All these things, therefore, combined, tells us that there is a problem on the African continent that needs resolving. It also tells us that the persistent gender biases seem to be static, not going anywhere, with little improvements. Started with the United Nations first conference on First International Conference, or First International Women's Conference, 1975. And that was declared, after the conference was declared a decade for women. So 1975 to 1985 was the decade for women. And it was hoped that the eradication of underdevelopment would take place during that decade, that there would be peace, and that women will gain access to resources and attain some form of gender equality. It didn't happen. The second conference took place in Copenhagen, again, International Women's Conference, Copenhagen, 1980. Same problems: poverty, marginalization, gender inequality. Third conference, Nairobi, 1985, same problem. Beijing, 1995. Beijing, 2000 or +5. All those conferences reiterate the same thing. How are we going to break the mold of gender biases and gender segregation? How are we going to enable an all-inclusive society where women also play a very important part, or women's roles in the development of their communities and nations are recognized and also rewarded? That is the bigger question. And so the pursuit of equality for women in all forms of political, economic, and social spheres becomes imperative. The conferences have laid out a world plan of action that continues to be the guiding light, and that we're still working on accomplishing some of those goals. And so now the Sustainable Development Goals have come to replace previous plan of action. And sustainable is a very interesting term because it implies the capacity to endure in a relatively stable manner. In the 21st century, it refers to the capacity for the Earth's biosphere and human civilization to coexist. A process of people maintaining change in a balanced way. A process where people not only take care of the environment, but make sure that that environment survives for future generations. And so whether it's climate change or environmental degradation or the cutting down of trees and timber recklessly, all those things are interconnected. Sorry?
Time.
Oh, okay.
Time.
All right, thank you. And so all those things therefore become important. Now, let me quickly say one or two things about the last part of the theme, COVID-19 and Africa. It's also part of the terms that we are now confronted with. Africa, like the rest of the world, woke up to the incredible news of COVID-19, the 2019 disease that shocked the world and overwhelmed health systems of most countries, even industrialized countries. The images of people dying were shocking. And on January 30th, 2020, the World Health Organization declared the human coronavirus outbreak, which started in Wuhan, China, on December 8, 2019, a public health emergency of international concern. That COVID quickly spread throughout the world through travel, through ignorance, through lack of public health protocols and policies at the time, and changed lives as we knew it, disrupted school systems and programs, shut down schools and cities and businesses. Today, the world is struggling with that pandemic, and it is an open secret that we live in a gendered world. Globally, women are affected in gender-specific ways in terms of economic dislocations, infections, and death. The pandemic has affected people of African descent in the diaspora disproportionately. About 40% of those infected in Africa are women. Health facilities are inadequate, and to make things worse, there is inadequate access to water, sanitation, and hygiene facilities, especially for the poor. This is a disaster waiting to happen, given the importance of access to clean water and the sanitation as a means of reducing the spread of COVID-19 and the incidence of infection. A closer look at the numbers can help drive the devastation and urgency of the situation home. Worldwide, the numbers of COVID confirmed cases are astronomical. In Africa, however, the total confirmed cases are 4,558,443. The active cases are about 364,467. Recovered patients are 4,072,174. Confirmed deaths are 121,800. Now, this is according to Life Tracker, Coronavirus in Africa, May 1st, 2021, a Johns Hopkins University report. Now, those are tremendous numbers of people who have died. 120 is one too many. And so if we take a couple of countries, for example, we have Nigeria, the total confirmed cases, 165,000. Active cases, 7,946. Recovered, 155,000. Deaths, 2,063,000. If we look at Cameroon, you have total confirmed cases of 72,250. Active cases, 35,885. recovered cases, 35,261. Number of deaths, 1,107. And so for Senegal, you have 40,388 confirmed cases. Active cases, we only see from the data, 169. Recovered, 39,000. Deaths, 109. Ghana, total confirmed, 92,561. Active, 1,500. Recovered, 90,196. Deaths, 779. And then South Africa, confirmed cases, 1,581,000. Active cases, 21,000. Recovered, 1.5 million. Deaths, 54,000. And so it really is scary to see the number of people who are dying. And for Africa, in terms of data collection and research, it's always a challenge to find complete information. Some countries were missing on the tracker data. For example, Tanzania, Botswana, Western Sahara were missing. Other countries literally stopped reporting COVID figures or delayed in providing their report. And so in Cameroon and in Nigeria, there seemed to have been a steady climb in the numbers. And that begs the question, why? Because from the first case of one person arriving with COVID to the jump 5 times to the point that the countries are today, it means that something went wrong. And so the question is, why was there an increase at an alarming rate when Cameroon government, for example, like many in Africa, received donations, resources, and relief funds in the millions to fight the spread of COVID-19? You know, to partially answer the question, you might say inadequate enforcement of public health safety measures, bad governance and leaders, mismanagement of funds, corruption, lack of health infrastructure, shortage of health workers are to blame. You also have, in terms of findings, that there is new variants of the COVID-19 virus that have been identified in Africa. And this has added to the growing concern. You have specialized staff and materials that are needed for what is known as genomic sequencing, which is important in identifying these new variants. And these include the Indian variant, the South African variant, the UK variant, and the Brazilian variants that can now be found in Uganda, which was the first country to identify the Indian variant. You have in South Africa, and you have hello? And so these variants are indeed a problem for Africa, because not all African countries are equipped to have the genomic sequencing. In terms of the impact of COVID on women, the prospect of infection and death from COVID pandemic, there are pointed differences between the capacity of the rich and the poor and marginalized groups to respond to the devastating effects of the pandemic, which has the potential to increase economic and social stressors for the poor. While in some cases, wealthy people have made much money and gained more social and political influence, women are suffering because the burden of making ends meet has intensified, particularly for individuals and households whose primary employment is in the informal sector, and most African women fall in this in this category. The lockdown also, or quarantine conditions to reduce this prospect of infections, has not only increased families' connectedness, but also created more work for women whose workload has increased, given that most women are responsible for childcare and care for the sick or recovering family members. Children who have to stay at home for their remotely delivered education also are mostly supervised by women. Oh, you want me to stop now? Okay. Okay. And so there are two types of vaccines in use in Africa, the AstraZeneca or COVAX supplies and the Johnson & Johnson. And most countries have launched the COVID immunization campaigns, but others are yet to acquire those vaccines. To conclude, therefore, even with initial deliveries, Africa lags behind the rest of the world in vaccinations. The continent has administered only 2% of the vaccine doses administered globally. That is a miserable percentage. To move forward, therefore, this address aimed at showing the importance of gender balance and the attendant consequences of failed policy, the failure of implementation of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals and the impact of COVID on Africans. Gender equality and women's rights are integral to the vision and national development agenda of each country. We have created awareness of gender disparities and their economic, social, and political consequences, and suggested strategies for organizing gender-sensitive plan for equitable response. We want to explore opportunities to introduce technology-based platforms for teaching, learning, and research, and also offer solutions to facilitate civic engagement and democratic solutions that foster recovery from the pandemic and its devastating effects. African countries have to take gender equality seriously. More than 52% of the population cannot continuously be marginalized. Advocates of gender equity must continue to push for women and youth empowerment for a better future. And we have to do everything to break the transmission of the virus in order to safeguard Africa's future. We also want to hold our leaders accountable and mobilize and sustain their commitment and actions with regards to gender equity. We also want to implement the SDG 4, Education for All, and encourage the implementation of gender-sensitive policies. As a people, a community, we have to connect policies and realities on the ground. We want to recognize and act on knowledge for the common good. Be our sister or brother's keeper. As Africans, this is our duty, this is our right, and this is our responsibility. Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, bring in their field of study. One of such is this outstanding scholar whose profile I'm privileged to present to you today. Dr. Nicholas Ozo owns a double PhD in agricultural extension from the University of Nigeria and in international and rural development from the University of Reading, United Kingdom. Dr. Ozo is currently the Executive Director of the African Technology Policy Studies Network, ATPX, Nairobi, Kenya. He was formerly a senior lecturer in the Department of Agricultural Extension, University of Nigeria, Nsukka. Dr. Ozo is a Commonwealth scholar and he holds the best PhD thesis award in agriculture in Nigeria in 2006, as well as he also has another award, Wellcome Trust Award for the best PhD presenter at the University of Reading in 2006. He is also He is also a teaching fellow and a mentor of African Climate Change Fellowship Program. Dr. Ozo has led and is currently leading many international funded research projects, both on science, technology, and innovation, SDR, natural resource management, innovation system, climate change, development issues, policy development, analysis and advocacy, technology and management and transfer, and private sector engagement, among several others. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Ozo is a member of many professional organizations. He has published over 120 articles in reputable international journals and book chapters, as well as other multimedia channels in the area of STI and development issues. Dr. Ozo has raised over $50 million United States dollars in grants to support development work in Africa and supported many African countries to develop policies and strategies for STI. He sits on the board of many international organizations, including governing board of the International Research and Training Center for Science and Technology Strategy, a Category 2 center under the auspices of UNESCO. He is a member of the International Advisory Committee for German Bioeconomy Council. He holds many distinctive prizes and awards for academic excellence and good community leadership. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, welcome with me, Dr. Nicholas Ozo, an outstanding scholar, an outstanding policy analyst, and an outstanding researcher who present the lead paper for the fourth biennial international conference of the Directorate of Gender and Sustainable Development Academic College. You're welcome, sir. Everybody all over the world is waiting for you. We know you are about to be done. We can have you now. Don't forget your promise that you are going to report the PowerPoint along as you are making the presentation while the previous one was on. Dr. Holmes, please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, the Master of Ceremony. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
We can
Thank
hear
you
you.
very much.
We can hear you.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would want to thank the previous speaker, Professor Bridget, for really tutoring us. I would also want to thank the convener of this very topical event, Dr. Mrs. Martina Chinelo Onwebu, and the provost of Adeyemi College, and all the team members who have put together this very wonderful conference, and who, for the matter of records, are trying to align with the new normal of virtual conferencing. It may not be easy at the start, but we'll get there. So I'll be sharing my screen, but before I do that, allow me to also, just like the previous speakers, link up my contact with Adeyemi some 17 years ago when I we are not yet, it is not yet Uhuru. So some 17 years ago when I was collecting data for my PhD, my first PhD in Nigeria, Ondo State happened to be one of the 6 states that I collected my data from. And I'm very glad that Adeyemi offered me lots of logistical support to enable me collect data from farmers, from extension agents, and such data I collected led to producing a very good PhD thesis that won the overall best PhD in Nigeria in the year 2006 in the area of agriculture. So I still commend Adeyemi for hosting me during that period. Now to go straight to my presentation, I would automatically say that I'm privileged to be presenting with women here who are really recognized fellows in the area of gender. So I don't know whether you can see my screen.
Yes, we can see your screen.
Okay. Very good.
Can
So
see us.
if you can see it, then I'll proceed to make
Very
my
clear, very clear. You can see.
All right. So I am privileged to be one of the as the first male to speak after a series of female presenters. So I'm very privileged, and that shows that the team has really considered gender balance, because when we talk about this gender, some people think it's only women. Men are even now facing extinction in so many things, and therefore need to be highly preserved. But let's leave that discussion for another day, as I go straight to my presentation on why good and inclusive governance is imperative for Africa's future development, especially in the COVID-19 era. So the outline of my presentation will follow this structure. I'll briefly talk about my organization and introduce what good and inclusive governance is all about and why. I'll talk about the relationship with SDGs and Agenda 2063, the Africa we want. I'll briefly go through the elements of good and inclusive governance, which I now call GIG, and then place us on Global Good Governance Index ranking for Africa, know where we stand as countries. Then shed more light on the benefits of GIG to Africa, as well as the challenges to attaining a good and inclusive governance. And then I'll conclude the recommendation. So I will talk about my organization, which I head, the African Technology Studies Network, ATPS. So ATPS is a transdisciplinary network of researchers, policymakers, civil society actors, and the private sector actors that promote the generation, dissemination, the use, and mastery of science, technology, and innovation for Africa's development, for environmental sustainability, and global inclusion. We work through national chapters located in 30 countries, but our headquarters is here in Nairobi, Kenya, where we enjoy diplomatic privileges and immunities accorded other UN agencies and organizations. And our mission is to improve the quality of science, technology, and innovation, systems, research, policy, and practice by strengthening capacity of people at individual, organizational, and systemic levels. We generate knowledge, disseminate this knowledge, as well as use it to ensure that we attain sustainable development on the continent. Every year we undertake, every 5 years we develop a strategy, and during this period, we are working on 4 core areas that are very close to the heart of development in Africa, and that's the area of agriculture, nutrition, climate change, environment, energy, and health innovations. So, move straight to, sorry, coordinator, I'm getting some holdback. I don't know where that is coming from. If you can stop that. Thank you. So, on what is good and inclusive governance and why, I would like to introduce some concepts first before we delve deeply. Permit me to inform that good and inclusive governance have been touted as one of the panaceas for achieving sustainable development in Africa. This is more so in the COVID-19 era, when people's human rights, access to social justice and services and equity have been denied by the same system that is supposed to protect and assist the people. So this paper provides an in-depth understanding of what good and inclusive governance is, and why it is imperative for Africa's future development, especially in the COVID-19 era. So both experiential evidence and secondary data were used to justify the objectives of the paper. And as you may know, from the beginning of this conference, a lot of terms have been used and been resonating, and that's about governance. Governance. The last speaker talked about bad governance as responsible for some lack of reporting, adequate reporting of the COVID statuses in our countries. So governance is an issue that in countries like Nigeria or in African countries, we definitely talk about it every day because we expect a lot from governance, especially because we want it to be inclusive, because we want it to be good. So talk about inclusion. Inclusion is the practice or policy of providing equal access to opportunities and resources for all people, regardless of their abilities or disabilities in a society. So when all people participate and ensure that they give out their voices and as well benefit from the governance outcomes, then we say this government is inclusive. And what is governance on the other side? On the other hand, they are the mechanisms and structures that enable relationships between, that regulates the relationship between the state and the state actors and the non-state actors. That is the government, what we now call government. On the one side, the executive, the legislature, the judiciary, and the public, or the non-state actors, including the civil society, which are like the police of government. They police the government. And when we talk about mechanisms, we refer to like constitution, policies, bills, legal frameworks, and so on and so forth. And when we talk about structures, institutional structures, we are talking about organizations like ministries, departments, and agencies that implement these policies. So when is governance inclusive? Governance becomes inclusive when it effectively serves and engages all people, takes into account gender and other facets of personal identity, and when institutions, policies, processes, and services are accessible, accountable, and responsive to all members of the society. Inclusive governance has been described as a basic fundamental to long-term sustainable development. So for sustainable development to happen, the 17 SDGs that the previous presenter, Prof. had mentioned, you must have inclusive government. And where governance is not inclusive, of course, you immediately see the impact because people feel secluded, people feel that they are marginalized, people start rioting. It leads to a lot of impacts that we shall see in the course of this paper. According to the UN Secretary General, former UN Secretary General, Kofi Annan, he defined inclusive governance as, he said that good and inclusive governance is perhaps the single most important factor in eradicating poverty and promoting development. Because where everybody don't have access to the governance process and outcomes, then you see that there is danger and people tend to be revolting. So let's distinguish between what we call process-based and outcome-based inclusion in governance. While process-based inclusion refers to how decisions are made in terms of who is included in decision-making processes, how and why, whose voices count, and how these dynamics and interactions shape the nature and quality of decisions taken and how they are implemented. Outcome-based inclusion refers to questions of distributional equity, such as the way in which key development outcomes like infrastructure, health, education, water, sanitation, social welfare, justice, security are distributed or shared in the society. The extent to which governance is more or less inclusive has to do with the extent to and ways in which people and groups that have been traditionally left out or marginalized, including women, young people, some races, some ethnic people, and religious groups, disabled, transient, and migrant population, etc., are able not only to participate, but also to exert greater influence in political processes and to hold government authorities to account. So in governance, in inclusive governance, we must ensure that people participate both at the process level and also benefit at the outcome level. So the rationale, why do we gun for good and inclusive governance? It is to preserve and strengthen confidence in government. So if the citizens lose confidence in their government, then it means there is danger. Again, it is to leave no one behind in managing complex challenges such as inequality, urbanization, climate change, violence, and so on and so forth, and the need for efficient management of resources under a convivial atmosphere. So it is important that governance is good and inclusive if you must build as a government the confidence of the people. So let's see the linkages between GIG, SDGs, and the Agenda 2063. As we all know, Agenda 2063 is the Africa we want, developed by the African Union in collaboration with all the member states, 54 member states. So the key to Africa's political, social, and economic transformation for the next decade is found in the African Union's Agenda 2063, which is broken down into 10 yearly agenda items. Like currently between 2004 and 2024, we have the STIZA 2024, the Science, Technology, and Innovation Strategy for Africa, which identifies 6 key pillars and priority areas for Africa's development. This agenda articulates the aspirations of the Africa we want, which is a 50-year development program for realizing the full potential of the continent. And it identified the need for good and inclusive governance, democracy, respect for human rights, justice, and the rule of law as the basis for achieving sustainable development in the region. Secondly is the issue of SDGs. I'm happy the previous speaker, Prof, had already described or mentioned these, but maybe I take a different approach because I say that inclusivity is implicated in every one of these 17 goals. So the concept of inclusivity, carrying everybody along, giving everybody equal opportunity and access to process and outcome-based governance, is implicated in each of these. And I'll give just maybe after the development of the Sustainable Development Goals, the UN went further to develop targets that could be used to measure each of these goals. Unfortunately, no country in the world has today been able to be certified as having met these goals based on the targets set. But my interest here is to show how inclusivity underpin each of these development goals. Let's take number one, no poverty. If we go to target 1.4, it states that by 2030, the goal should ensure that all men and women, particularly the poor and the vulnerable, have equal rights to economic resources, as well as access to basic services, ownership and control over land and other forms of property, inheritance, natural resources, appropriate new technology, and financial services, including microfinance. If you say equal access, including land, there are some ethnic groups in Nigeria where you say that and you will be chased. So that shows you that we may not be really meeting these targets because of some other challenges that may not necessarily be about good or bad governance. Let's go to number 2, which talks about end hunger or zero hunger. If you look at target 2.1, it states that by 2030, end hunger and ensure access by all people, in particular the poor and people in vulnerable situations, including infants, to safe, nutritious, and sufficient food all year round. But then today we see, unfortunately, that people can die because of hunger. When I came to Kenya for the first time, there was this hunger issue that some people can starve and die because there is no food. There was no food to eat. So that is dangerous. If we look at number 3, which is about good health, another aspect of inclusivity says that by 2030, end the epidemics of HIV/AIDS, now COVID-19, tuberculosis, malaria, and neglected tropical diseases, and combat hepatitis, waterborne diseases, and other communicable diseases. You see, it's still talking about inclusivity. The issue of this COVID-19 is a case in point where we are both developed world and developing world are equally affected because we all have cases. And because of this, the goal says that we need to carry everybody along. And that's why even the African continent, without our ability to develop vaccines, we are still receiving vaccines developed by other countries. Let's look at goal number 4, about quality education. The target 4.5 states that by 2030, we should eliminate gender disparities in education and ensure equal access to all levels of education and vocational training for the vulnerable, and so on and so forth. You see, equal access to education. There are countries where even women are not allowed to go to, some ethnic, some tribes in some countries where women are not allowed to go to school. As they are made to drop out when they get pregnant, and so on and so forth. So the issue of inclusivity is implicated here. If we go to goal number 5, which is really like the domain of this topic on gender sustainable development, talking about achieving gender equality and empowering all women and girls, you find that there are all the targets are very important, and all forms of discrimination against all women and girls everywhere, and so on and so forth. I don't want to bore so much on these goals, but I can assure you that each of them, I can get a target that speaks to each aspect of inclusive governance or inclusivity, to say the least. Let's go to the next to understand the elements of good governance. So what makes up good governance? There are 8 key elements that respond to the present and future needs of a society in terms of good and inclusive governance. And the first one is what I call that good and inclusive governance must be participatory. Participatory here by both men and women is a key cornerstone of good and inclusive governance. It requires that all groups, particularly the most vulnerable, have direct or representative access to the systems of government as civil society and citizens with the freedom of association and expression. Today, if you talk against a ruling government in some countries, you will be arrested. That is not good governance. If you talk against a ruling government, not like you are talking against, you state the facts. Then if you are in the diaspora, you may not be allowed, when you return to your country, you may not be allowed to go in, or you'll be arrested. I remember in 2005, when I was in the UK doing my PhD, some of my classmates who are Zimbabweans could not go home because they said that once you go home, even after our graduation, that you'll be arrested because they usually meet every Fridays in central London to protest the leadership of the then president, Mugabe, So you'll be haunted. So even in Cameroon, some of my friends could not take dual citizenship because once you take a dual citizenship and you return to Cameroon as a Cameroonian originally, you will need visa to come back home. Those things, are not so juicy. So, talk about rule of law as another key element of good and inclusive governance. Rule of law is exemplified by impartial legal systems that protect the human rights and civil liberties of all citizens, particularly the minorities. This is evidenced by an independent judiciary and a police force free from corruption. But is that true? So with all these indicators, it will be easier for you to know whether your country is observing good governance or not. Do the executive adhere to the rule of law, to the justice system? Do they intimidate the judiciary? Do they observe the rulings of the court? In many countries in Africa, that is not the case. And that has deepened our score in the global good governance index, that we are not doing very well. Responsiveness simply involves that institutions respond to their stakeholders within a reasonable time. Consensus-oriented ensures that the diverse viewpoints of the many different actors in any society are considered. But this time, in most countries, once you have a different opinion and you air it out, then you'll be chased by the government machineries to intimidate you. That is not good governance. Equity ensures that all the members of a community feel included and empowered to improve or maintain their well-being, especially those individuals and groups that are most vulnerable. Effectiveness and efficiency is developed through the sustainable use of resources to meet needs of a society. Sustainability refers to both ensuring social investment carry through and natural resources are maintained for future generations. Finally, is accountability as a key element, which refers to institutions being ultimately accountable to the people and to one another. This includes government agencies, civil society, private sector, all being accountable to one another. Accountability is a key indicator of good or bad governance. And in our countries today, we have seen the fight against corruption going up very and down, undulating, and even having a biased approach in catching the leaders who are corrupt or who are not accountable. So, however, this issue of inclusivity and governance, I must tell you, is not a straight line graph. It is not linear. It is complicated in a bit. It is something that requires efforts of all, both the state and the non-state. Non-state including the civil society, the NGOs, the citizens, and the government, the executive, the legislator, and the judiciary. And I'll use this schema to give you an example of how complex a policy-making process is in any government. So you can have the key actors in the government, the cabinet, the parliament, the ministries, the private sector, the civil society, the donors, international agencies, who are part of this policy-making process or to make governance inclusive. And for that to happen, for you to have one single policy, there is interaction from the ministry, maybe who initiates, if it is the ministry that initiates a bill or a policy or a change or a program, or the cabinet or various, or the parliament. It takes the same process of policy formulation, decision-making, policy implementation, monitoring, and before you, originally you start from agenda setting, then you go around the circle. So it has not been, it is not a straight line graph. You can see how this interaction happen that make it very complex, that you can get one policy to be passed after about 1 year, and you'll be asking, why is it, just like the approach that we used to hear, the Indian Amin of Uganda went to the CBN governor to say, print more money. So it is not straight line that you don't have money and you just go to the central bank governor and say, print more money. There are a lot of things that are involved. Recently, we have heard about that also in Nigeria, but that is not the topic today. So if we look at the Global Good Governance Index ranking for Africa, we understand that this governance is serious. World leaders take it very seriously, and they have taken note of 6 broad dimensions which they use to evaluate countries. One is about voice and accountability, which captures the perception of the extent to which a country's citizens are able to participate in selecting their government, as well as freedom of expression, freedom of association, and a free media. Media, very important. Political stability and absence of violence, perceptions of the likelihood of political instability and of politically motivated violence, government effectiveness, regulatory quality, and same rule of law, as well as corruption, control of corruption, which is perceptions of the extent to which public power is exercised for private gain. So, as a matter of fact, these are the variables that are being used to rate countries. And I am not happy to report that Africa, the closest country in Africa in terms of world ranking of global good governance is Mauritius, which still, according to the 2020 ranking, was number 10 in the whole world. As a matter of fact, Czech Republic and Ireland and Slovenia ranked first, second, and third. Germany ranked fourth. But then we are concentrating in Africa. But to see that only Mauritius was able to come to the 10th position, and then the next was Seychelles at number 53, which means you can see Mauritius, Seychelles, Ghana, Morocco, Egypt, Ethiopia, Botswana, Senegal, Kenya, and Cote d'Ivoire. In terms of good governance, these are the best 10 for Africa, but they are not good when we compare the other 200 countries and territories across the world. One will be asking, the former speaker will be asking me, where is Cameroon? Where is Nigeria? And all this. So you see that in the next slide, Nigeria ranked number 14 in Africa, but you can see our ranking in the whole world, scoring only 46%. But below the chart is Chad. Chad, of course, you can see, you must have heard last time that maybe due to still bad governance, the country's president was murdered. And again, instead of entering into democracy to get a new leader, we are informed that the leader's son, who is also a general in the army, is made to be the next president. So you see those kind of governance structures that are not good. And that leads to so many other challenges that make Africa not to get our governance right. Let's look at the benefits of good and inclusive governance. For the sake of time, I'll be a little bit fast here. Of course, it is natural that good and inclusive governance will definitely enable Africa to achieve our sustainable development goal. That is, in our parlance, in our organization, we used to say that politics is superior to science. We used to promote that we need to get involved in this politics and not allow those who are not really qualified to get involved, because otherwise we will still be affected. So I have tried to construct about 5 key benefits of good and inclusive governance in Africa. One, it leads to social cohesion and peaceful ecosystem. And good and inclusive governance give rise to peaceful ecosystem where all the members of the society feel important and hence are able to contribute their quota towards development. This ecosystem builds strong social cohesion, peace, and security. To achieve any developmental objective in any country or society, there must be peace and security. In an atmosphere where all people from different geography, gender, ethnicity, language, etc., at all times are proactively represented in governance, both the process-based and the outcome-based, and the development dividends equitably distributed across all these people, there tend to be less agitations for rights and privileges, hence creating a convivial environment for development to happen. Peace and security is therefore the greatest benefit of good and inclusive governance that nations must pursue to embrace at all costs. So there is a positive relationship between peaceful societies and more inclusive states, with state-society relations based on legitimacy. So we are trying to say here that unless there is this cohesion, this peace happening in a country, you will not have opportunity for investment. because as we shall see maybe in the next benefit, which is wealth creation and poverty reduction, where it said that fighting poverty and improving human development in Africa must begin with the creation of wealth, a process that requires the existence of a robust entrepreneurial class, public-private partnership, and foreign direct investment. In order to achieve these goals, there must be peace and security, especially the peaceful coexistence of various ethnocultural groups that inhabit each country. There is evidence of the impact of inclusive governance on reducing poverty and inequality. Gender equality can promote economic growth with positive impacts on macroeconomic growth. From a developmental perspective, good governance is a major means of promoting sustainable development, reducing poverty, and maintaining peace. Unfortunately, weak and dysfunctional governance structures continue to prevent many African countries from creating and sustaining the necessary enabling environment for peaceful coexistence, entrepreneurial development, and wealth creation. For instance, it is no news that many foreign investors that target the Nigerian market today do situate their headquarters in other neighboring countries like Ghana because of insecurity, banditry, kidnapping, and ethnic supremacy that have saddled the Nigerian governance ecosystem. I mean, this is what we see every day, and it is no more news that many companies, global companies, when they see that the Nigeria's ecosystem in terms of peace is not good, they relocate to other countries. They move out their investment. Some of them have closed shop in Nigeria and moved to Ghana. We lose jobs. We lose our people who are working in these companies. Pushed back to unemployment, so which is not good. We look at equitable distribution of development outcomes as a key benefit. So under good and inclusive governance, the development outcomes in terms of public goods and resources such as education, healthcare, infrastructure, water, electricity, roads are equitably distributed across gender, ethnic dimensions, and so on and so forth. Unfortunately, the political class and elites are usually not incentivized to implement pro-poor economic programs that enhance the ability of the poor and marginalized. So it is a problem because like we used to see in the news, where in Nigeria, there are some ethnic groups that are trying to show dominance or supremacy over the others. And this is also seen even in the governance system, where appointments are skewed to a particular region or a particular ethnic group at the detriment of the others. These are the things that lead to agitations. These are the things that lead to violence and so on and so forth. There is need to curb this and ensure that there is equitable distribution of development outcomes. We talk about ownership and voice. When people participate in programs and in policy development, you find that they help to develop it, and they see their voice and signatures inside it, they help to protect it, as long as their voice have been heard. Overall, where there is a good and inclusive governance, the well-being of the people tend to be more. Before Gaddafi was destroyed and Libya entered into the problem they have today, you find that a graduate in Libya will always receive some salaries, have a house, they will marry for you. I mean, government will take care of all these things. The government take care of the system. And you find the welfare, in short, single-handedly, Gaddafi then was almost sponsoring the African Union with funds for meetings and so on and so forth. But then, due to other reasons, he was destroyed. And let's briefly look at challenges that make us not to achieve JIG in Africa. I'll be brief here, and I'll talk about 6 of them. Ineffective policy implementation. It is not that we don't have these policies, but most of the time, because if you look at our constitution, though there are areas for improvement, but you look at the policies and programs, the laws and bills, they are all in order. But the implementation is the greatest problem for Africa. Dysfunctional institutions. Of course, institutions, it is unlikely that the continent will be able to successfully and effectively implement and achieve SDGs and our Agenda 2063 unless institutions are reformed to enforce good governance, undergirded by the rule of law. Institutions here mean organizations, both organizations, that is the ministries, the departments, and the agencies. And we have seen a lot of impact of dysfunctional institutions in the country, which is very detrimental to our progress. For instance, in the COVID lockdown, access to internet has surged, and so vulnerabilities, and we have had situations where because of lockdown, institutions are not able to perform their work effectively. We have had cases where even what is meant for the public as palliatives have been diverted into private warehouses, and we know the after effect of that. Ethnic-induced violence and insecurity, this one is very common. Once there is bad governance, it leads to ethnic-induced violence, and because people want their voices to be heard. Corruption in high places, the corruption index is not favorable to many African countries, and it is bad for us. In the corruption index 2020, we still see countries like Cameroon topping the list, Uganda, Sierra Leone, Kenya, Nigeria, which is not favorable to our development. Disregard for the rule of law, I've spoken about this, and especially where countries' presidents tend to push for tenure elongation. They tend to change the law to extend their terms from the constitutional 2 terms, for instance, to now indefinite terms. We have seen that in Rwanda. We have seen that in Cameroon. We have seen that in Angola. We have seen that in Uganda and many African countries. And this is not speaking good about us. Let me quickly conclude because of time. And as my conclusion, I would say that Africa generally ranks low in the Global Governance Index, an indication that the key elements of good governance are not followed and put into force. This situation is as a result of ineffective implementation of existing policies, dysfunctional institutions and capacity, ethnic-induced violence and insecurity, corruption in high places, and the disregard for the rule of law. My recommendations, I have 4 recommendations. One is what I call robust national dialogue. Each country must assess itself in terms of know their governance challenges and engage in robust national dialogue to enable an effective and inclusive governance system to happen. They should cultivate transformative leadership at all levels of governance. Dialogue is important because through dialogue, we're able to share our differences, understand ourselves, and then conjointly in a transdisciplinary manner, formulate a proactive way forward towards a sustainable development that is inclusive, of course, and meets the need of today's people without endangering the needs of the future. Recommendation 2 is about institutional reforms. Africa will be able to successfully and effectively implement and achieve their national agendas, SDGs, and the Agenda 2063 if its institutions are reformed to enforce good governance that are undergirded by the rule of law. If you recall, when Obama visited Ghana during his visit to Africa, he maintained that what Africa needs is strong institutions and not strong men. We don't need strong men. We need strong institutions so that they can bring reforms to the governance system. The third recommendation is what I call process-driven constitution making. Countries should engage in process-driven constitution making to produce an agreed upon governing process that is characterized by the separation of powers with effective checks and balances, a robust and politically active civil society, an independent judiciary, and a viable, free, and independent press. There are some countries where the press are intimidated. Just the other day, we celebrated UN World Press Free Day, and it is unfortunate to recall so many people who want to speak their minds and who want to show what is happening in a particular place. The other day I was reading in a Nigerian newspaper where it was being banned to share pictures and so on and so forth of some things. We are living in a free world, and therefore we should allow some freedom of speech as long as it doesn't bring confusion. My final recommendation is on education and orientation. And I said that with the aid of civil society, should develop and implement education programs to help citizens understand and appreciate the Constitution and its provisions, and recognize the law as a tool that they can use to organize their private lives and resolve conflicts, including those arising from trade and other forms of exchange. Programs for empowering youth and women could be particularly fruitful. Education, education, education is the key. My people wallow in ignorance because they don't know. And therefore, if people are in the know, they know their rights, you find it difficult to intimidate them. So there is, I used to hear about the National Orientation Agency. They should take up some issues, like even the gender directorate at the Ademi. They are doing a great job, and I like the presentation from the Her Excellency, the wife of the governor, and all the brilliant initiatives that she was mentioning that they were doing. This is very important because when people are in the know, they tend to now protect their rights and social structure. So I want to use this opportunity to thank Ademi College for kind of reuniting with us. And I hope that we will be able to have a joint program. My organization runs a Africa-wide gender program called African Women Forum for Science, Technology, and Innovation, AWFST. And we try to empower women in science and technology, especially STEM areas, to enable them to also be in the forefront of science, technology, and innovation as women, as youth. So we would like to even sign an MOU with you and under this program, and see how we can co-implement programs across Africa together. On this note, I want to say thank you again for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, distinguished colleagues across the world. We appreciate you, Dr. Nicholas Ozo. I told you earlier that Dr. Nicholas Ozo is an outstanding scholar, an outstanding policy analyst, and I said an outstanding researcher. You can equally see that he is an outstanding political analyst as well. Can we put our hands together for Professor? Sorry, I know it's going to be very soon. Dr. Nicholas Ozo. Thank you so much for being a part of this. We sincerely appreciate you. I think at this point, the program is gradually winding down. At this point, maybe I should welcome the Deputy Director of Directorate of Gender and Sustainable Development at the College of Education, who is going to be coming up to do two things together. Just one. In that wise, I need to bring up the director of to come and do a closing remark, because I feel there's a difference between closing remark and both of that. My director, Dr. Mrs. MC, please come over to do the closing remark.
Good afternoon, everyone. All protocols duly observed. I want to inform us that the program is almost winding up. From all we have gathered from all the presentations today, we have listened to Her Excellency, the First Lady of Ondo State, talking about the areas where Africans still need to, work harder in the area of emancipation and empowerment of women. The African widows are still marginalized. Women in general are still marginalized. And she specifically mentioned the aspect of digital knowledge, which is a very big problem. During the coronavirus, so many COVID-19 periods, so many women lost their jobs because they could not have access to maybe computer, they did not have the computer knowledge and all that. You cannot believe that at this stage, there was a day I went to the bank, I saw a very rich woman, and she was struggling with the ATM machine. I said, Madam, a very wealthy woman. I said, what's wrong with you, madam? What's the problem? She smiled and said, please, you know not so great. So I said, okay, bring your ATM card. So it's as bad as that. So many women cannot operate, even in some higher institutions. So many, not only women, even men cannot operate ordinary WhatsApp. So we have a lot to do in the area of digital knowledge. Then the speaker also talked about violence against women. No. You go to almost of the countries in Africa now are in turmoil. Nigeria here is not safe to go anywhere. You don't know where it's happening, where the shootings are going on. The same thing in Cameroon, so many other countries in Africa. And who are the people who suffer? They are the women, the children, who will be hands, the persons, internally displaced persons, the persons' hands. Who are the people there? They are the women, they are the children. We still have a long way to go in Africa. With all the programs that our doctor has mentioned here, G&G, the SDGs, and even the African project for 2063. hammering on so many things. It's very appalling that of the 10 countries that were able to, that were recognized as the countries that measured up, in gender gap, measured up in their level of gender gap, it's only one country in Africa, Mauritius. So we have a lot to do in Africa. In terms of our policies, in terms of our governance, everybody, all the speakers of today talked about bad governance. And it has been going on and on. This year we think things are going to know better, but we are going back every day. We have good policies, we are not implementing them. So all these are the problems which African governments, we Africans should also help ourselves. Because there's this saying by the UN women that one is a job for many, it's a job for us. It's not just for one person. I alone cannot make Africa better. I cannot contribute to water. But when all the African governments, step up and take the bull by the horn, we will see a great improvement. Thank you. So now we are wrapping up the program. My deputy will come up and give the closing remarks. While I thank everybody who has been here today, Her Excellency, the First Lady of the State, our provost, our naval provost, Dr. S.A. today, and all the members of the management team, and all the deans and directors present that attended this program, the HODs, and all our distinguished guests. I thank you all for being here today. Tomorrow is another day. We are going to have the panel sessions. So all the people concerned, all the stakeholders will be giving their panel views. We are expecting you all tomorrow to witness the panel session. Thank you.
Of the Directorate of Gender and Sustainable Development Studies, I would like to appreciate the wife of the governor. She is very Anna Wakeli. We really appreciate you for your support and your contribution. God bless you, man. Then we appreciate the provost of this college, Dr. Samuel. We thank you for your financial support towards the success of this ceremony. We also appreciate the deputy provost, Dr. Ade, all these directors, all the HODs present. We really appreciate you all. We thank the keynote speaker, Dr. Bridget Tebo, for her comprehensive and educative lecture. We thank you so much, and also appreciate the newspaper presenter, Dr. Nicholas, also for the detailed lecture given to us this afternoon. We also thank all the participants of this conference. I would want to encourage all of them to be here tomorrow early for the plenary session so that we can have it on time. Thank you all. Looking forward to see you in the next edition of the conference. Thank you so much. God bless you.
Well, Mrs. Ahmed, expecting you to take the closing prayer.
Mrs. Ahmed. Somebody else.
Let's start with closing prayer. Eternal rock of ages, our God and our Father, we thank you, we bless your name for this very day. We give you glory and honor for being with us right from the beginning of this program. Say, Lord, let your name be exalted in Jesus' name. Thank you for the peace of the celebration. Thank you, mighty God, for the directorate of gender, human development. Thank you, mighty God, for even the project executive. Thank you, mighty God, even for all the participants. Father, we say, Lord, take glory in Jesus' name. Father, as the program is ongoing, we pray, Lord, God of heaven, we pray with us all the activities in Jesus' name. Thank you, Father, for your answer, Lord. Jesus' name, we are praying. Well, the program is closing with the national anthem and the college anthem in reverse order. The 2 minutes. Thank you. Congratulations.
Huh? No, it's already muted.